Good day to everybody. Today we're going to cover a CISA review course, which is a Certified Information System Auditor. And we're going to do a little bit of a review course here online. We're going to cover it in probably 20-minute chunks as we go through, so watch our feed to see other episodes coming later. So what is a Certified Information System Auditor, and why does anyone care? So the Certified Information System program's been around for quite some time, since 1978, and it is probably one of the earliest, it's the earliest one that I know of cybersecurity standards, certifications for professionals, although it probably wouldn't have been called cybersecurity at that time, but it's one of the longest running ones available, and it has more than 90,000 professionals worldwide. And in addition to that, we are talking, this is an international organization that administers the certification, and the program for it has been accredited under ISO standards, which means that the process of being certified, tested, your continuing education, and how they manage that whole program as a standard that needs to be followed, and it has been evaluated against that standard. So if you take a look at various cybersecurity degrees that are certifications that are available for professionals today, you'll find the Certified Information System Auditor is one of the top ones and has been one of the top ones. CISA, the Information System Audit and Control Association, is the organization that set up the certification and manages it, also manages some other things, but they also have a Certified Information System Manager certification, which is much newer. The Certified Information System Auditor has been around for a very long time. They have a number of other certifications that are available that fit better needs probably in the job market today. At the time, in the 70s, if you think about it, starting in the 60s and 70s, you saw organizations start to really use computers. One of the first departments within most organizations that got computers was the accounting department for accounting purposes. And at that point in time, when the industry started to see that information technology was being used in finance, then the financial accountants and the auditors and whatnot said, hey, this is something that we need to have specialized understanding of, and probably specialized training and certification for the individuals who are going to do assessments or audits on those systems. And so and because of that certification, you have to know the cybersecurity things, but you also have to know how to do an audit, and what does it mean to have an audit or an assessment? What is independence? Those are things that a lot of cybersecurity professionals don't necessarily understand. So even if someone is a Certified Information System Security professional, this aspect of the Certified Information System Auditor is going to be like a sliver, but going much deeper in the knowledge base than most other cybersecurity certifications are going to go. It also has one of the unique things that the federal government has requirements, the GAO, well, they have a recommendation rather, that 65% of the staff that is performing information system audits is a Certified Information System Auditor or equivalent, but the only specific certification that is outlined is the Certified Information System Auditor. Also, DoD recognizes it as one of the certifications that you can use if you're going to be in the information assurance or cybersecurity part of, and that's going to be your job duties. And again, for this part of it, even if you're not an auditor, it may be good to go through. But that's why ISACA came out with the Certified Information Security Manager, to kind of so that you don't have to learn all the audit stuff, but you can still learn all the same knowledge base that you would have as a Certified Information System Auditor, but light on the audit and more on the management aspect, which is what more people seem to need today. But there is a deficit in auditors. In other words, there's more work to do than there is people certified to do it. So it's a good certification to have going forward. So what does it require that you do? Well, obviously there's an exam involved. In addition to the exam, that you have to adhere to ISACA's Code of Professional Ethics, and we'll go over that in this session. And then you have to submit evidence of at least 5 years of professional IS auditing, control, or security work experience. So if you've been doing cybersecurity, that can fit into that category. If you've been doing auditing in the information system side of things, then it fits into there. And you also have to adhere to the information system auditing standards that are adopted by ISACA and agree to comply with the Certified Information System Auditor's continuing education policy. This is a professional degree, not like a subject matter expert. Typically, a subject matter expert is someone who, when we have certifications like that, they're typically certifications that you have to take another test again, and they're very narrow, usually focused. Professional degrees tend to be broader and not as deep, but require continuing education. You will find that this is the same type of standard that is used for doctors, for lawyers, for certified public accountants. All of them have the same type of thing. You have the minimum requirements, you have to take an exam, and then you have continuing education that is required to follow along with it. So candidate requirements, you have to have your 5 years of experience, and it has to be gained within the last 10 years. So you can't say, well, I learned it all in the 60s and 70s, and now, I want to take it. Well, that's too long ago. In addition to that, you can substitute one of those 5 years for, if you have non-information system auditing experience. So if you have financial auditing experience, well, you can count that in there. If you have been an instructor for 2 years at a university teaching this stuff, you can count that as 1 year. If you have 60 completed university semester credits, that is a bachelor's degree. So you can substitute 1 year of experience if you have a bachelor's degree. Or a bachelor's or master's degree from a university that enforces the ISACA-sponsored model curriculum. And I don't know what organizations actually do that. So, or a master's degree in information security or information technology. So all of those things can give you a year's worth of experience. 2 years of experience can be substituted for 120 completed university semester credit hours. So that is either a master's or beyond a master's. And I don't know why they say you can have a master's degree and then you can substitute for 1 years of experience, but well, if I have 120 credits, can't I get the 2 years? So I don't know. You'd have to look at that specifically there. And you'll have to see the candidate's guide to see. And by the way, they changed these things, and I haven't updated it in a year or so. So there may be some changes. And by the time you watch this video, there may be changes to it. They offer it annually, and I don't know if they've changed it to electronic exams yet, but typically they have it in different locations. In addition to having it in multiple locations, there is an exam date, there's an early registration deadline, and a final destination registration deadline, so you have to actually pay attention to that, when those deadlines are going to be. If there is a local ISACA chapter in the area, you can join ISACA, the organization, prior to taking the certification exam, so that those local you can go to the local chapter meetings, and when you go to the local chapter meetings, some of them have prep courses that you can go to that cover the same type of stuff that I'm covering here, but that gives you the ability to have some other peers that you can bounce ideas off or ask questions of, or peers that you can study with to help you out. So you'll get all your information prior to you going in to take the exam. They'll tell you where the exam's going to be, and they'll give you all the instructions to it. If they give out the oral instructions on how to sit for the exam, you come after that, then they're not going to let you in. So you have to be very careful about making sure that you're on time. You don't bring your phone into the examination room. You don't bring books or anything else in there. If English is a second language for you, you can typically get a non-technical what do you call it, a language dictionary, but you'd have to check on that because it's been some time since I've taken it, so I don't know if that is still a requirement, but you'd have to check that out. So on the test day, be prompt, bring your admissions ticket, and then if they're still doing which I think they are, you still need to bring some pencils and good erasers for you. And whatever the test center's rules are, you need to observe them, because if for any reason they eject you from it, you don't get a refund. So don't even look like you're cheating. So no reference materials, no blank paper, no notepads, no language dictionaries. I thought they allowed you to have language dictionaries. I may be wrong. That may be the CISSP that allows that. You can bring or you don't bring or use a calculator. No type of communication device. They call it a communication device because, it could be a cell phone. It could be something else, right? No visitors, no food and beverages. If you have the requirement, you're diabetic and you need to have some sugar, or you need to have water or something along those lines, they can make allowances for that. But they will want to inspect the whatever you're bringing in, just so you know. So the CIS exam has 200 multiple choice questions, and then their scale, they're graded on a scale from 200 to 800. 200 is the lowest, 800 is the highest, and you need to receive more than 50% of that, 450. Between 200 and 800 is about 400. Anyways, you have to beat a score of 450. Well, it's actually 300, but one of the things they don't tell you is how the scoring works. So is each question worth 1, or is it weighted, or some weighted heavier than others? They don't explain any of that to you, and that's not public knowledge. That's information that they keep to themselves. So there's really no way to figure it out what it is. So you can't figure out, well, if I get this many right, I'm going to get this score. It doesn't work that way. And then they will mail you your results. It usually takes about 8 weeks if it's a paper test. And I don't know, again, I should check to see when they're going to switch, or if they have switched to electronic testing. So what I recommend is, if you're going to take the exam, that you start with a successful study plan. You need to have a comprehensive list of the references and all the recommended study materials. I recommend that you go to ISACA, you go to their chapter events and whatever they have. They have also for sale on the bookstore in ISACA, the CISA review manual, and it's updated every year. So 2012 is what I got showing here, but there's a new one for 2018. They change the questions every year, so they update the materials every year. If you had last year's, could you still take it? Well, if there hasn't been any major changes to the exam, then yes, you could probably use last year's materials. However, I recommend you just get the newest ones. The practice questions are typically questions from actual exams that they have that are previous year's exams that they have now. They don't use those questions anymore. So it's going to be the same type of questions, but it's not going to be the same questions that you're going to get on the exam. So it'll give you an idea what last year's was, and if there's not a lot of changes, then it should help you out. So if you look on their website under the particular exam, then you can see where you can get those materials. And I think they typically have a package that you can buy, and it may be a couple $100 to do it. So for maintaining your Certified Information System Auditor's degree or certification, you'll need to have a minimum of 20 continuing credit hours or continuing professional education hours, and complete at least 120 in 3 years. So what does that really mean? That means you need to be doing 40 a year. And I always aim for more than 40 a year. I'd rather have a few extra than not enough. But you can go down to as low as 20, and you need to have your 120 in 3 years. So if you divide that out, that's 40 a year that you really need to be targeting. I do not recommend that you do 20 and 20, because then you only have 40 done, and then how many do you have to do? Right? So you want to kind of avoid that. There's a lot of good ways to get it. You can attend online seminars. You can go to the local chapter meetings, which they typically have once a month. Most chapters have once a month. I'm a member of the San Francisco chapter, and they have one once a month. And usually, if you go to that, then you can get a certificate for attendance, and it gives you 1 hour of CPE. And that means I can get 12 a year. And they usually do it where they have lunch with it. So you pay a small fee because you're getting lunch with it. There's a lot of online opportunities. ISSA, the Information Systems Security Association, has a lot of online seminars that they do, and some of them are really good information. And they're a professional organization as well. So they're not necessarily doing sales. It's not like you're getting a sales pitch. You're getting information that can be useful. A sales pitch, if not sales pitch, but if you go to what they call like a demonstration or a webinar that a vendor is putting on, typically those are like half educational, and then the other half is them selling their product, right? So you can see where they would have an issue with it if you just attend all those type of things, and they have a limit. I believe they have a limit on how many of those you can do. Another great way to do it, and one of the ways that I get most of my credits taken care of a year, is to attend a security conference like RSA. So I go to the RSA conference. It's here in San Francisco every year. I attend it, and I get 30-something hours right off the bat right there. So I don't have very many more to do per year to get my total of 40 per year. Also, if you do any training or things like this, where you're presenting to to a group of people or an organization or whatever, if you're doing some training, then you can also get credit for that. There's stipulations around that, so you have to look at what those are. And in addition to keeping that up to date, you also have to comply with the Code of Ethics. So the domains in these percentages are older percentages. They change these each year, so I can't really tell you what they are each year, so they change a little bit. And sometimes they move around the practice domains, and that is just basically a bucket of information. So what is the process of auditing information systems? So that idea, that bucket of information, anything related to that's going to be fit into that domain. And in that domain, there's going to be a certain number of questions. And from this year that they had done it, which I think this is from 2012, this was 14% of the questions, or the weight of the questions in the exam, is about that. And then 14% is about governance and management of IT. And then 19% went to information system acquisition, development, and implementation. So this is life cycle aspects of IT. And then operations, maintenance, and support, that's all kind of like under one of the steps of the system development lifecycle. But that operations and maintenance aspect is 23%. And then the protection of information assets, which we would probably call cybersecurity proper, if you're looking under CISSP or other certifications, kind of fits into the 30%. So you can see that there's not a whole lot of auditing that is necessary, but the governance and management of IT kind of falls into that, and that is really about, like, some people are like, what do you mean by governance? What does that mean? It is management, but it's probably a little bit more. It's managing the risks related to the systems as well. And so it's not management like I'm the IT manager and that's my job. It's more like, okay, how does the enterprise put policies and procedures and operations in place to make sure that the goals and objectives are met, that IT is in alignment with overall organizational mission statement and goals and requirements. And then how do you make sure, what processes do you put in place to make sure and then validate that the supporting processes and the technology underneath it is all meeting those needs? So it's kind of outside of IT. For a lot of IT people's perspective, it's kind of outside of IT, because a lot of people think IT is the technicians, right, and the engineers, the people that are touching the servers and dealing with the blinking lights. But this is outside of this. This is more of the management side of things. This is more of the operational. This is the policies, procedures, and then maybe internal audit's a part of this as well if an organization has internal audit. So you can see that some of this, and I should point out with this exam, I know a lot of people that are in cybersecurity, and I know a lot of people that have very similar certifications, whether they have the CISSP or they have the CISA or they have other certifications. And I've talked to a lot of them, and universally, I have been told that this is the hardest exam that people have taken, the CISSP and other certifications, even Certified Ethical Hacker, that this was the hardest exam. For me, I thought this was the easiest exam. Then again, I'm an auditor by trade, so I think if you haven't been an auditor, this will be difficult because the terminology, you have to give you a little bit of history of terminology, and this is where some people get mixed up on stuff. In the Department of Defense and in the military aspects of cybersecurity that started back in the early days of computing, they would use words like safeguard and countermeasure for what we call controls today. And the people that were in the organizations that were the IT folks, the Certified Information System Auditors back in the 70s and whatnot, they were a kind of tied very closely to the financial side of things. And so using terminology from the financial side of things became what a lot of the IT organizations did that were specifically early on, because they were tied to accounting, they would adopt the terminology used by accounting rather than the terminology used by the Department of Defense. It's not until recently, and in some of the later iterations of NIST, that we're starting to get terminology that is going across the board, that we're all starting to use the same terminology for the same things. And so because that didn't happen up front, I think a lot of the old books you read, especially if you read like in the old days, the Rainbow series from the Department of Defense, you would read documents today and you think we're talking about different things, but they're talking about the same thing because they were using different terminology, meaning the same thing, using different terminology. So I recommend you go to the website that they have. You can look up each of the certifications that they have. You can look up the requirements for it. They have the code of ethics available for you. So everything you need for that aspect of, do I qualify? What are the current, domains of practice, and what are the percentages this year? You can go and check out on their website. They'll give you a brief overview of it. If you want to buy the study guide, you have to pay for that separately, but you can check that out on their website. So code of ethics. The first, I guess they call them preambles, or just the first point of it, is that you support the implementation of and encourage compliance with the appropriate standards and procedures for effective governance and management of enterprise information systems. And so in this one, they're basically saying, as a professional, one of the things that we need to do is support the industry, but we also have to support good practices. And so let's talk about a good practice. What is an example of a good practice? Well, let's start with a bad one because that's easier. I come to an organization and I say, oh, you don't need that antivirus, just turn it off. That is bad advice coming from a security professional, right? There may be some mitigation in there. You may have a good reason for it. You may have some other compensating controls in place. Maybe it's segmented network and it's not connected to the internet and nobody touches it any other way. Well, maybe in that case you could say we don't need antivirus, but really anti-malware is kind of a no-brainer. You have to have at least that today, and if you don't have it, then you're at risk. So this is what it's saying, that as a professional you have to support good standards and those types of things, and procedures that are beneficial to the organization. That's proper governance. The second one talks about perform their duties with objectivity, due diligence, and professional care in accordance with professional standards. So there's professional standards. You can get them on ISACA's website, but you want to make sure that you perform your duties with objectivity. In other words, you should not be biased. And as an auditor, there's a requirement for independence as an auditor, and you have to understand that if you're in the role of an auditor with a client, that means that there's certain things you can't do because you have to be independent in one of the process that you're auditing. You can't go in there and say, hey, I want to set the firewall for you. Oh, and then I'm going to audit it for you. That's a no-no. You can have somebody else set it up, and then you can audit their setup. And you can't get paid by the other person for doing it. So, because then there's this, there's a perception that there's no independence. So independence becomes part of it, and you have to be objective. And so, for example, people always ask me, well, what's the best browser, or what is the best operating system? And that's kind of a loaded question. As a professional, my things, it depends upon the use case. So what is the particular use case you're doing? When people make statements like, I don't use Microsoft because they're a big corporation, and I'm like, okay, but Apple is too, right? So, I mean, some people make comments based upon their personal feelings and not objectivity, and they make it based upon a brand that they particularly like or care for or whatever, and not based upon the objectivity. And so you have to be a professional about it. You can't just, it has to be based on some kind of relevant facts. The third one, serve in the interest of the stakeholders, whoever you work for, or the client that you're working for, whatever it is. Key point, in a lawful manner, right? While maintaining high standards of conduct and character. And the whole point is we don't want to discredit the profession or ISACA. So as a certified information system auditor, you are not allowed to tell somebody, oh, you don't need to license that software. If the software requires licensing, you tell them that they are required to do licensing. And I've had a lot of tough conversations, this being an auditor. I'm saying, I have to tell you that this is what is required, and this is what's the law, or this is what the contract says, and that is what you're supposed to do. And I don't give them any other option. Now, if they can come into me and say, oh, well, we're going to do this, then I'm like, well, I can't force you to do anything. I can only tell you what I can tell you. But that's where this is coming in. You have to do what's the best for them, and it has to be lawful, and you don't want to do anything that discredits the profession. Because
question?
Yes.
Would it be fair to say that this is similar to being the fiduciary responsibility for if you're a management or senior manager in an organization?
Yeah, a good question. I think that's very similar to what we're talking about here, because it's the same type of responsibility that you have to do what is in the best interest of the organization, as provided that it follows the law, right? So if you're in a fiduciary responsibility within an organization, you're really not allowed to break the law in order to make more money, right? That's a violation of it. But then you also have to do what is in the best interest of the organization, and obviously wasting money would not be one of those things either. So there is, that fine line between the making sure that you're doing something lawful and then making sure also that you're doing what's in the best interest of the stakeholders. In theory, they should always be lined up, right? But in practice, they're not always. But as professionals, we just have to draw a line in the sand and say, look, this is our responsibility. My responsibility is to tell you this. And then if they don't listen to you, they don't listen to you, but you've done your due diligence, which is your requirement to do those things. And then I would say even take a step further. If they asked you to do something that wasn't legal, then I'd say, no, I'm not doing it. I've drawn the line on things that I thought were unethical and not technically illegal. I've also drawn the lines on those things. So those kind of fit into there. So you need to maintain the privacy and confidentiality information obtained in the course of the activities. In other words, if you're an auditor and you find out all this stuff, you can't just go out and blurt it out to everybody. Now, I give examples all the times because I say, oh, I was on an audit and this happened, but I never get any specific information, and the information is just generic. You could never find out what client of mine it was, or even if it was my client, if it was somebody else's client that told me the story. So you can't just take the information and say, hey, client XYZ did XYZ. You can't do that. The only time that you can really give the information out is if you're legally compelled to. In other words, you've been served with papers and you have to go to court, or they've subpoenaed information, or you have to give testimony. Those types of things, then you would have to give the information. Otherwise, again, you're put into a place of trust. You're going to have information. As an auditor, you're going to know all the dirty laundry that any organization has as far as, I hate to say this, but if a hacker really wanted to get the best type of information about an organization, he'd probably want to find out who their auditors are and hack their. I hate to say that, but that's where auditors typically understand, what controls are in place and how they're not in place, right? And that's the type of information that bad guys would want, or criminals, to get into to breach organizations. And so they can breach it that way. They can also breach it because you're out talking, oh, I did an audit for so and so and they're terrible. You should never say anything like that, right? That one, you're not doing the benefit towards the stakeholders, but then two, you're also bringing discredit to the organization, and we can't be trusted to keep our mouth shut about stuff that we know, and we need to be able to be seen that way. So don't release any information to inappropriate parties as part of what you're doing. You have to think of it as, I've done this job for this, and it's only for them and them only. Typically on our reports, we put down that it's confidential. Reasons why we put confidential on it and then label it is so that it can fall under there's different laws governing what information can be subpoenaed and when it can be subpoenaed, and what information, if you're working for a government agency, falls under freedom of information and all that stuff. So we want to make sure that we always label what it is. If we produce a report that tells them what our security is, that's sensitive information. Maybe it's sensitive but unclassified, depending upon how the federal government's doing their classifications, depending on who's the president and what they've signed into executive orders as to how you're going to handle certain types of data and what they're going to call it. But you want to make sure that you're handling it appropriately, and this is that type of information. The fifth one is that you got to stay up to date. That's why we have the continuing education. You have to be an expert in your respective fields, and you have to do whatever it takes for you to keep up with the skills, knowledge, and abilities that you need. So that's where the continuing education comes in. As an auditor, if someone comes to me and says, hey, I need you to audit this type of system, and I've never audited that type of system, I would say I can't audit that type of system, right? So in other words, you have to have some familiarity with it. You have to understand how the stuff works. If you don't know anything about networking, how are you supposed to audit a network? There's no way that you could do it. You have to understand the basics of networking and what types of risks you're going to have related to routers or switches or VLANs or VPNs. Whatever it is, if you don't know what that is, you can't audit it. Because, I mean, a long time ago when I first started auditing, we had financial auditors go out and ask the IT questionnaire, and the IT folks could just tell them anything and they would believe it. They go, oh yeah, that sounds right, and it wasn't right. It was some of it total BS. And then I, as an IT person, going in there and then starting to do the questionnaires, I'm like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Well, what about this? Oh, well, yeah, this. And I'm like, oh, well, that's a finding. So you have to understand what it is that you're reviewing or auditing or assessing. And then part of it is inform appropriate parties the result of your work. So if you do something and you find something, you're required to tell management. And by management, I'm saying if you're an auditor and you're external to the organization and you find that the IT manager is not, you find that, he orders it with 6 gigs of RAM in it, but there's only 3 gigs in it or something like that. So someone's been taking it out and you find that, you have to report that to management. You have to let them know, hey, we found something that could be potentially fraud. And it needs either further investigation or we have determined that it is fraud, and management needs to take action. It's not our job to fire anybody or anything like that. We have to take these things to management or to the appropriate party, which may be, if an organization has a whistleblower clause, how you get it to that appropriate person to do that. So it just depends upon how it's set up. If you have organization that has a board, you may report to the board. You may report to internal audit. It just depends upon where that is. But the idea is it has to be reported if necessary. The seventh one is support the professional education of stakeholders. In other words, we have to educate end users and management of corporations on what it means for IT risks, what those risks mean to them, what it means to their organization. We have to help educate them. That's part of our job. They don't know what they don't know. They go and take MBAs and they have no idea what it takes to protect something from cyber threats, and that's what our job is. So, including doing the audits and giving them reports and doing risk management and giving them reports, part of our job is to educate them. And their job then is to take that information and then make sure they set the tone at the top to make sure that all their reports and their reports and all the way down the chain of command, I guess is the best way to put it, follow those requirements. All right. So it's not a good idea if you tell them, hey, you need to do change your password on a regular basis, and then the CEO says, well, I'm never changing my password, I don't have to. Well, that doesn't set a good example or tone at the top to push it down. So you want to make sure you do that. So why are controls and audit important? We're going to come to that next session, and hope to see you then. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Trainers Underground. If you have any requests for future episodes, please go to our website, www.learnsecurity.org, and fill out the comment section. If you found this video informative, please like below. We would greatly appreciate that. If you would like to catch a future episode, just follow this channel or find it on our website, www.learnsecurity.org. If you have any comments about today's episode, please comment below. Again, thank you so much. And remember, stay safe and secure.